This is part 2 of my videos on Germany, and the last one ends on a bit of a dark note as Germany has just fought and lost the First World War. Things are going to get even darker now as we see the rise and fall of Weimar Germany and the beginnings of a certain controversial figure, Adolf Hitler. Okay, so at the end of 1918, Germany has just lost the First World War, and Kaiser Wilhelm has abdicated, marking the beginning of the German Revolution, in which power has shifted towards civilian government and parliamentary democracy in Germany. The leader of the Social Democratic Party of Germany, Friedrich Ebert, was given power, and he was expected to defend the Republic against communist revolution, which was a genuine threat at this point. This brings us to the Spartacist Uprising in January 1919, in which the Communist Party of Germany, led by Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, issued a proclamation deposing the Ebert government and starting a new Council Republic, just like the Bolsheviks had done in Russia. Over 500,000 workers went on general strike in Berlin, and so the government turned to the help of paramilitary units called the Freikorps to put down the uprising. Within 3 days of savage street fighting, the communist revolution was crushed and their leaders were executed. A lot of Freikorps would later join the far-right uprising, the Kapp Putsch, the following year to overthrow the government. In this scenario, the revolution failed because the workers went on strike and brought Berlin to a standstill. As you can probably tell, there was some serious tension and violence between far-left and far-right forces in Germany, which is actually going to be a characteristic of the whole period. Despite these threats, the state survived, and in the city of Weimar in August 1919, the Constitution was signed and the Weimar Republic was born. A president would be elected every 7 years as the head of state, and they could appoint and dismiss the chancellor and dissolve the parliament. The legislative power was in the hands of a parliament called the Reichstag, which was elected every 4 years by all men and women aged over 20, and was also based on proportional representation. The Weimar Republic, on paper, became one of the most democratic and progressive countries in the world. But there was also Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which said that in times of emergency, the president could suspend all civil and political rights and take whatever steps he deemed necessary to restore law and order. Not so democratic there. Anyway, Germany has just lost the First World War. This was the most horrific war Europe had ever seen at this point in history, and the British, but especially the French, wanted to severely punish Germany for what had happened. Negotiations took place at the Paris Peace Conference without a German delegation, and the Treaty of Versailles was imposed on Germany in the summer of 1919. It was absolutely brutal on the country. Germany was to lose a bunch of land to France and Poland, as well as all its colonial territories. It was only allowed a professional army of 100,000 men, and most controversially, there was Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, which forced Germany to accept full responsibility for starting the war, and all the damages and losses sustained by the Allies as a consequence of German aggression. Across the political spectrum, from left to right, the treaty was completely denounced, but the government was forced to sign it, further feeding into the stab in the back legend. It was later decided that Germany was to pay the Allied powers reparations of 6.6 billion British pounds, paid back in annual payments and raw materials. Couple that with the fact that the German state had racked up quite the debt from the war, and Germany was broke as hell. At the start of 1923, Germany had defaulted on its reparation payments to France, and in retaliation, French and Belgian forces undertook military action and occupied the Ruhr, one of the industrial heartlands of Germany. This was a huge screw you to German sovereignty and caused a major political crisis. But it did bring about a wave of patriotism and unity in Germany, not seen since the beginning of World War I. The government opted for passive resistance and told the workers in the Ruhr not to cooperate with the French and Belgian forces. So France brought in their own workers to operate the mines, and for the next 9 months, Germany and France engaged in a long struggle in the region. With the onset of the Ruhr Crisis, this was really the last blow for the economy. With the huge debts and reparations Germany had to pay, the government was just printing a lot of money. And if you want to know why this is bad, just ask any finance pro you can find, why can't we just print more money? And I'm sure they'll be glad to lecture you on the subject. The value of the German mark fell dramatically. At the start of 1923, $1 would buy you 7,400 marks, but by November, $1 would buy you 4.2 trillion marks. A lot of people's entire life savings had been wiped out, as money became virtually worthless. And you may have seen these photos of people literally using money as wallpaper or wheelbarrows full of cash. The Weimar Republic was at its lowest point both politically and economically, but in comes a man called Gustav Stresemann as Chancellor. In a bold move, he creates a whole new currency called the Rentenmark and limited its supply so that $1 was equal to 4.2 Rentenmarks. As the danger of inflation vanished, confidence in the economy was eventually restored, and Germany finally got back on track. In 1924, passive resistance in the Ruhr was called off, and France won the standoff, but they did accept the Dawes Plan, allowing Germany to restructure its reparation payments. Stresemann became foreign minister and managed to get on decent terms with France, and Germany later joined the League of Nations in 1926, getting closer to becoming a great power once again. The next few years were known as the golden years of the Weimar Republic, as we see a cultural boom and a massive inflow of foreign capital and an expansion of the state welfare system, as national income levels finally reached pre-World War I standards by 1928. Things were looking good for Weimar Germany, but it all went south in 1929 with the onset of the Wall Street crash in America. Germany's over-reliance on American finances meant that it was probably the most vulnerable country in the world to any downturn in the American economy. As the US economy collapsed, American banks stopped investing into the German economy and started calling back their loans. Things were bad, but when the European banking system later collapsed in 1931, the situation went from bad to goddamn awful, and by 1932, 6 million Germans were unemployed. Heinrich Brüning was chosen as a chancellor to get the country out of the depression, but the policies he put forward, such as increasing taxes and reducing state expenditure, were fairly unpopular with the Reichstag, and so Brüning got President Hindenburg to give him emergency powers to rule by decree, effectively ending parliamentary democracy in Germany. And yes, this is the same Hindenburg who turned Germany into a military dictatorship during the First World War. This brings us on to another certain controversial figure, Hitler. You probably know some of his backstory already. So he was born in Austria, didn't get into art school, moved to Munich and served in the First World War. He was then sent to spy on the meetings of the German Workers' Party, but found himself agreeing with most of what they said and became their leader in 1921, which had reorganized itself to become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, aka the Nazi Party. In the crisis year of 1923, Hitler thought that it would be a great time to launch a revolution in Bavaria, and with the help of General Ludendorff, the Nazis attempted to launch the famous beer hall Putsch. This failed, and in Hitler's trial of 1924, he used it as a platform for a political attack on the Republic. Despite admitting to high treason, he only spent a year in jail, and there he dictated his infamous book, Mein Kampf, in which he outlined his future plans for Germany. In his eyes, there were 3 groups that were to blame for Germany's ills. These were the Communists, the November traitors, and the Jews. He was released and led the party. But in the years of stability in the Weimar Republic, it was difficult for the extreme parties to gain much support. But a massive economic crisis and depression, well, then there you have your opportunity. Hitler had a bit of a knack for public speaking. He was able to feed off people's hidden resentments and anxieties, and convince the people that he would fix the crisis and lead Germany back to greatness. In 1928, the Nazis had around 800,000 voters, but by 1932, it had 13.7 million voters, nearly 40% of the electorate, and became, by far, the largest party in the Reichstag. With the Nazis becoming the biggest party, Hitler demanded to become the Chancellor of Germany. Brüning refused to reconcile with Hitler, and the new Chancellor, Franz von Papen, believed that Hitler could be controlled once he was in the government and if his cabinet was not dominated by Nazis. On a fateful day in January 1933, President Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany. So Hitler became Chancellor, but he wasn't in complete control just yet. What it would take is a series of steps to turn the Weimar Republic into a totalitarian dictatorship within 18 months. First things first, in February 1933, the Reichstag building was set on fire, and a young Dutch communist was the alleged culprit. Whether he acted alone or whether the Nazis actually orchestrated the fire is another question. But either way, the incident occurred at exactly the right time for the Nazis, as the Communist Party was growing quickly. The Nazis claimed that the fire was a signal of a communist uprising in Germany, and Hitler was able to use his emergency powers and brutally suppress Nazi opponents as he attempted to destroy Marxism in Germany. Next thing on the agenda was the Enabling Act. This was a law that would give the Chancellor the power to make and enforce his own laws without the involvement of the Reichstag. In March 1933, the Reichstag took a vote on the matter, and whilst they were taking the vote, they were greeted by a pretty intimidating and hostile atmosphere as SS soldiers and swastika banners filled the room. The Enabling Act was passed, and all other political parties were banned, and parliamentary democracy officially ended in Weimar Germany. Then Hitler had obstacles from within his own party to deal with. The main perceived threat was Ernst Röhm, who was the leader of the Nazi paramilitary unit, the SA, which had numbered around 2 million men. Compare this to the regular army, which was capped at 100,000 men, And Rom genuinely believes that the SA should replace the traditional army, the idea of which the generals absolutely resented. Hitler needed to keep the army and generals on his side to pursue his foreign policy goals in the future, and in June 1934 he launched the Night of the Long Knives, as the leaders of the SA and some of Hitler's other enemies were murdered. This was a popular move of the army, and from now on, soldiers would swear oaths of allegiance to Adolf Hitler instead of the Constitution. It was also a popular move with the people, as it showed that Hitler was a leader that was willing to move against his own party if it represented a threat to German society. Finally, in August 1934, President Hindenburg died. So you have the position of Chancellor and President. Slap them together and what do you get? The title of the Führer of Germany. Germany had completely transformed into a fascist dictatorship with Adolf Hitler as its unchallenged leader. And on that dark note, that's the end of the video. And the next one will cover Nazi Germany and Germany's road to the Second World War. See you then.